If you're listening to this late at night, I want you to understand something before I go any further. I'm not telling this for entertainment. I'm telling it because whatever followed me doesn't stay in one place, and because silence feels like a mistake I can't afford anymore. Welcome back to Nightmare Crypt. Turn your lights down, lock your doors, and if you see someone standing where they shouldn't be, don't assume there's a reason. I don't know how much time I have before this stops being my story and starts being yours. I keep checking the windows while I write this, not because I see anything there, because I don't, and that's worse. I've learned the hard way that when she's visible, at least I know where she is. There's a moment burned into my memory that I can't escape, no matter how hard I try. It's not the worst thing that happened, but it's the moment everything became irreversible. I was standing in my kitchen, barefoot on cold tile, holding a glass of water I hadn't realized I poured. The house was silent in that deep, late-night way that makes every sound feel intentional, and I had the sudden, overwhelming certainty that I was not alone. Not in a paranoid way, not in a jumpy, scared of the dark way, in a calm, horrible, undeniable way, like realizing you've been saying something out loud that you thought was only in your head. I don't want to describe her yet. I can't, not without feeling like I'm inviting her attention again. All I can say for now is that once you notice her, she notices you back. And she doesn't rush. She waits until you convince yourself you're imagining things. That's how it starts. I live in a small town in the Midwest, one of those places where people leave their porch lights on all night and wave even if they don't know your name. I rented a single-story house at the edge of town, backed up against a stretch of undeveloped land, just weeds, a drainage ditch, and a line of trees that blurred into farmland beyond that. The house was cheap, clean, quiet. Every morning I woke up at the same time, showered, made coffee that tasted faintly like burnt plastic, no matter what brand I bought. I could hear my neighbor's garage door open at 6:40 a.m. every weekday like clockwork. At night, a train passed somewhere far off, low and distant, like thunder you could ignore. The first thing that felt off was the reflection in the hallway mirror. It was subtle enough that I didn't register it right away. I'd walk past and think I saw movement behind me, just a flicker, like someone stepping out of frame. I blamed angles, lighting, fatigue. The mirror was old, slightly warped. The second thing was the smell. Sometimes, usually after sunset, the house smelled faintly like old fabric that had been stored too long. Not moldy, just stale, like a thrift store coat that still remembered someone else's body heat. I washed everything, vacuumed, opened windows. The smell kept coming back. I told myself houses do that. They trap things. Then I started noticing her outside. The first time, I thought it was a neighbor walking along the road. I glanced up from my phone and saw a figure standing near the edge of my yard, just past where the grass gave way to weeds. Tall, still, dressed in dark clothing that didn't reflect the porch light. I blinked. She wasn't there anymore. I didn't feel scared, just embarrassed, like I'd stared at nothing for too long. Over the next few weeks it happened again, always at a distance, always at night, just present. I stopped mentioning it to people. I didn't want to be that person. Sleep started to feel optional. I'd lie awake listening to the house settle, counting the pops and creaks like they meant something. Sometimes I'd hear a soft sound near the windows, fabric brushing against glass maybe, or wind catching the curtains even when they weren't open. One night I woke up convinced someone was standing in my bedroom doorway. I didn't see anything. I just knew. My skin prickled like it does when someone stares too long. I held my breath and waited for the feeling to pass. It didn't. The next morning, there were faint smudges on the outside of my bedroom window. Not handprints, just darker streaks where condensation hadn't formed evenly. I wiped them away and stood there longer than necessary, staring at my own reflection in the glass. That's when I realized something that made my stomach drop. The reflection didn't move when I did. It lagged, just a fraction of a second, enough to make me question myself, enough to make me step back. That night, I saw her closer than ever. She stood at the end of the driveway, under the broken streetlight. The light flickered, and every time it did, she seemed to shift slightly. Never closer, never farther. Just wrong. She wore black from head to toe. Long coat, something that could have been a dress beneath it. Her hair hung straight and dark, framing a face I couldn't quite focus on. She didn't wave, didn't call out. She just stood there. I shut the door and locked it, my hands shaking for the first time since this started. Somewhere around here, I need to say this once. If you're still listening, subscribe to the channel. Not for me, but because stories like this get buried, and ignoring them doesn't make them stop. After that night, the sound started inside the house. Footsteps where no one was walking, the soft creak of floorboards behind me when I stood still. Doors I knew I'd closed, left slightly ajar. I stopped trusting my memory. Reality didn't break all at once. It cracked. I'd find my keys in places I didn't remember putting them, hear breathing that stopped when I turned my head, catch movement in the corners of rooms that vanished when I looked directly at it. The worst part wasn't fear. It was the growing understanding that something was testing boundaries. One night, during a storm, the power went out. The house fell into a darkness so complete, it felt physical. Rain hammered the roof. Wind pushed against the walls. I sat on the couch with my phone light on, waiting for the power to come back. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, coming toward the living room. I stood up so fast I nearly fell over. My heart pounded in my ears. I called out, my voice shaking, asking if anyone was there. The footsteps stopped. Then the sound of fabric dragging across carpet. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I stood there in that tiny circle of light, waiting for something to step into it. It never did. The power came back on with a sharp click, and the house looked normal again. Too normal. Like it was mocking me. But I knew. She had crossed a line, and so had I. The night had ended, if ended is the right word. I woke up to the sound of my front door opening. Not slamming, not forced. Just opening. I lay there paralyzed, listening to footsteps move through my house with complete confidence. Whoever it was knew the layout, knew where they were going. The smell of old fabric filled the air. I finally sat up, my chest tight, and whispered for it to stop. The footsteps paused, then resumed, heading toward my bedroom. The footsteps didn't rush, they didn't hesitate either. They moved with the slow certainty of someone who knew I wasn't going anywhere. Each step landed just heavy enough to register through the floor, the sound traveling up my bed frame and into my bones. I sat there, frozen, my hands gripping the sheets so tightly my fingers hurt. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and uneven, loud in my ears. I tried to slow it down. I didn't want her to hear me panic. The hallway light flicked on. I hadn't turned it on. Warm yellow light spilled under my bedroom door, stretching across the carpet like something alive. I stared at that thin strip of light, waiting for a shadow to pass over it. One did. Not fast, not dramatic, just the slow interruption of light, like a person standing directly outside my door. I whispered please, without realizing I'd done it. The doorknob turned, not violently, not testing the lock. It turned the way someone does when they expects the door to open. When it didn't, the knob stopped halfway. There was a pause. Then came the sound of fingernails dragging lightly down the wood. Not scratching, not clawing, tracing. I slid off the bed and backed into the corner, my phone clutched in my hand. Useless. I didn't think to call the police. I didn't think to scream. All I could think was that this wasn't supposed to be happening yet, that I hadn't reached whatever point made this inevitable. The air felt heavier, harder to breathe, like the walls were leaning inward. The door opened anyway. The lock didn't break. The hinges didn't splinter. The door simply swung inward, slow and smooth, like it had always intended to. She stood in the doorway. Up close, she looked more real than I was prepared for. Solid, physical. Her clothes were old but not antique, just outdated, like something that had fallen out of style and never come back. The black fabric absorbed the light, making it hard to see where her body ended and the shadows began. Her face was pale, expressionless, and terrifyingly ordinary. No twisted features, no exaggerated horror, just a woman who looked like she belonged somewhere else. Her eyes didn't focus on my face, they focused on my chest, my hands, my movements, like she was studying how I worked. I couldn't move, my legs refused to respond. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. She took one step into the room, and the floor didn't creak under her weight. That's when I understood the paralyzing dread people talk about, the kind that shuts down logic entirely. I knew with absolute clarity that I wasn't in control of this situation. I wasn't even part of the decision-making process anymore. She tilted her head slightly, the way someone does when they're disappointed. Then she reached out. I don't remember her touching me. I remember the sensation of cold spreading across my skin, like the air itself had weight. I remember the smell of old fabric becoming overwhelming, filling my mouth and nose until I gagged. The room went dark. I came to on the living room floor. My head throbbed, my throat burned like I'd been screaming for hours. Every light in the house was on, lamps, overhead fixtures. Even the porch light outside blazed through the windows. I was alone. For a moment, a brief, dangerous moment, I thought it was over. Then I tried to stand. My legs buckled, and I fell back down hard. That's when I noticed the marks on my arms. Not bruises, not scratches. Finger-shaped impressions, deep and dark, like someone had grabbed me hard enough to leave shadows under my skin. They wrapped around both forearms, symmetrical, deliberate. I staggered to the bathroom mirror. What I saw there made my stomach drop. My reflection lagged behind me, not by a fraction of a second this time, by a full, unmistakable delay. When I raised my hand, the reflection followed a beat too late. When I turned my head, it hesitated, and behind me in the mirror only, she stood, closer than she'd ever been. Her mouth just slightly open, like she was breathing me in. I spun around, screaming. Nothing. When I looked back at the mirror, my reflection was normal again. She was gone. I didn't stay in that house another night. I packed what I could carry and left before sunrise, ignoring the ache in my arms, ignoring the way every shadow looked too deep. I didn't tell my landlord why I was breaking the lease. I didn't tell anyone the truth. I moved, then moved again, because she didn't stay behind. Sometimes I see her standing across the street from wherever I'm staying now. Sometimes she's reflected in windows I pass. Sometimes I only know she's near because the air feels wrong, heavy with that same old, stale smell. She doesn't appear every night. She doesn't have to. I'm telling this now because writing it down feels like the last thing I can do that's still mine. Because I think she's getting closer again. Because reflections are starting to lag everywhere I go. And because if you ever see a woman dressed in black standing somewhere she shouldn't be, watching, waiting, doing nothing at all, don't stare. Don't rationalize it. And whatever you do, don't let her inside. She's very patient, and she doesn't stop when she's chosen you.